when we talk about human aging, society tends to use like the metaphor of a car.
Well, yeah, always the car metaphor.
Right. Like you drive it off the lot in your 20s, the paint is shiny, the engine purrs, and everything is just perfectly calibrated.
Everything works exactly how it's supposed to.
Exactly. But then by the time you hit 60 or 70, the medical world often treats you like you're just this collection of mechanical failures.
Like the alternator is shot or the brake pads are worn.
Yeah, it becomes all about what is broken. And nowhere is that mechanical kind of deficit-focused view more damaging than when we talk about intimacy and aging.
I completely agree.
But there is a statistic from our sources today that should just completely dismantle that assumption. Up to 30% of people over the age of 80 are still sexually active.
It's wild. And if you look at adults in their 50s, I mean, that number jumps to around 70%.
70%.
Yeah. These figures fundamentally break the narrative we've all been fed about what getting older actually looks like.
And that is exactly why we are redefining aging, intimacy, and marital happiness today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're glad you're here with us.
Absolutely.
Our mission today is to shatter this societal taboo known as sexual ageism and uncover the biological and psychological science behind a concept called successful sexual aging.
Which is a fascinating field.
It really is.
Yeah.
We want to understand how adapting to age, rather than, fighting a losing battle against it, is the true secret to long-term vitality.
Right, because there's this pervasive, just false societal belief that getting older automatically flips a switch and a person simply becomes asexual.
Like it just evaporates.
Exactly. It is a deeply ingrained stigma, and it actively dictates healthcare. I mean, medical providers routinely fail to ask older patients about their sexual health simply because they assume it's a non-issue.
Which is crazy when you look at the 70% stat.
Right. But the reality is the human drive for connection, it doesn't just evaporate at retirement. What the data reveals is something far more nuanced.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the sources talk about the frequency satisfaction paradox.
Yes, that's a key concept here.
So obviously, the actual frequency of physical intimacy declines as we age, right? Maybe moving from a few times a week in early adulthood to, a few times a month or a year later in life.
Sure.
But the subjective satisfaction people report often remains completely stable. And in some cases, it actually increases, which feels entirely counterintuitive.
It really does at first glance.
If I try to map this to everyday life, is it like a favorite restaurant? Like in your 20s, you might be eating out constantly, grabbing fast food, it's high volume.
Right, just getting calories in.
Yeah. But later in life, you go to that one amazing place way less often.
Look at that.
But because you know the chef, you know the menu, and you really take the time to savor the experience, the actual satisfaction of the meal is higher.
That's a great way to think about it. The restaurant comparison captures part of it, but it's not just about savoring the exact same meal. In clinical terms, they call this adaptive reframing.
Adaptive reframing. Okay.
Yeah. Older adults are actively redefining intimacy itself. They stop using youthful performance-based standards as the benchmark for success.
So the goalposts move.
Exactly. Emotional closeness, physical affection, deep communication, those become the main course rather than just the appetizer. They adapt.
That makes a lot of sense.
And because they adapt their expectations, their fulfillment isn't tied to the sheer frequency of the act.
Well, and here's where it gets really interesting. Because if satisfaction isn't tied to how often the engine is running, we have to look at what's happening under the hood.
Right.
Our sources highlight this massive paradigm shift happening in medicine right now called system sexology.
Yes.
Now, for years, we've had the biopsychosocial model, which, acknowledged that the mind, body, and social environment are connected. But system sexology seems to take that a lot deeper.
It expands the lens significantly. System sexology looks at the couple as an interconnected biological system. It's not just two independent bodies sharing a house.
Okay, so how does that work physically?
Well, the emotional environment a couple creates actively and directly regulates their individual cellular health.
Wait, really? Which brings up the concept of the anti-inflammatory couple. I saw that in the reading.
It's a brilliant term.
So if a couple have high emotional attunement, empathy, and constructive communication, does that mean a good conversation literally acts like a biological ibuprofen?
That is...
Can feeling understood by your partner actually calm down systemic inflammation in your cells?
It's a really helpful way to visualize it, yeah. though the mechanism is more about preventing the inflammatory cascade in the first place.
Got it.
When a couple experiences that deep empathy, it generates psychophysiological coherence. Your nervous system registers profound safety.
Because you feel completely secure with that person.
Exactly. And this actively lowers your cortisol reactivity. Cortisol being the stress hormone that, when it's chronically elevated, causes widespread cellular damage.
Right. Stress literally kills.
What's fascinating here is that this state of emotional security also improves endothelial function.
Endothelial. That's the blood vessels, right?
Yes, the delicate inner lining of your blood vessels. When you're relaxed and connected, those vessels dilate properly. This improves blood flow and actually balances your immune response.
So the relationship is acting as a literal physiological buffer against aging.
Yes, it actively prevents inflammaging, which is that age-related, chronic, low-grade inflammation that drives major diseases.
Wow.
But, and this is crucial, the reverse is equally true. If a couple is characterized by a chronic relational strain, unresolved conflict, or emotional withdrawal,
They become an inflammatory couple.
precisely.
They basically act as a biological toxin to each other.
That's a strong way to put it, but biologically, yeah. They amplify each other's stress reactivity. You are constantly triggering your partner's fight or flight response, flooding their system with cortisol.
Which does the exact opposite of what we just talked about.
Right. It damages that endothelial lining, drives systemic immune dysregulation, and directly accelerates the onset of chronic, non-communicable diseases.
It makes complete sense that emotional strain causes physical damage. But, as we age, the physical hurdles themselves often create that emotional strain in the first place.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially because the biological timelines for partners are usually completely mismatched. So what does this all mean? Let's break down that biology, starting with women, where the transition is famously abrupt.
Yeah. Menopause involves a very sharp, relatively sudden drop in estrogen and progesterone.
Right.
And this triggers a systemic shift known as genitourinary syndrome of menopause, or GSM. Tissues change physically, they lose elasticity and moisture.
Which sounds incredibly uncomfortable.
It is. It leads to severe dryness, pain during intimacy, and an increased risk of urinary tract issues. It's a very pronounced physical hurdle.
Well, for men, it's a much slower burn, right? I mean, total testosterone drops about 1% a year after midlife.
Correct.
But what I didn't realize until looking at the research is that a man's usable testosterone drops even faster because of this protein called SHBG.
Yes, sex hormone binding globulin. Think of SHBG like a molecular sponge circulating in the bloodstream.
A sponge, okay.
As men age, the number of these sponges increases. So even if the body is still producing an adequate amount of testosterone, these sponges soak it up and bind tightly to it.
So it's there, but the body can't actually use it.
Exactly. The hormone is no longer bioavailable. The body simply can't use it to drive physical responses or energy, leading to a condition called late-onset hypogonadism.
And alongside that hormonal shift, there is vascular aging. The medical literature points out that erectile dysfunction isn't just a localized mechanical issue.
Not at all.
It's actually considered a sentinel marker for cardiovascular disease, which means if the microscopic blood vessels aren't working in one part of the body, it's a massive warning sign that the larger vessels feeding the heart might be clogging up too.
It's an early warning system for the entire cardiovascular network. Now imagine taking these two very different, divergent biological timelines and putting them into one relationship.
Right, it's a recipe for confusion.
One partner is experiencing a sudden hormonal cliff, while the other is dealing with gradual vascular decline. This creates a highly complex dynamic that researchers call the CouplePause.
The CouplePause. See, that framing entirely changes the perspective for me. It forces us to stop viewing these biological hurdles as individual, isolated failures and recognize them as a shared dyadic process.
Yes, it is a biobehavioral feedback loop. Think about it. If a woman is experiencing physical pain due to GSM, she naturally might withdraw from physical intimacy.
Because it literally hurts.
Right. Her male partner, who might be totally unaware of the specific cellular changes causing her pain, might misinterpret that withdrawal as a personal rejection.
Oh, I see where this is going.
That perceived rejection spikes his anxiety, triggering a stress response that constricts his blood vessels, which in turn worsens his own vascular issues.
Wow. So a physical problem in one partner creates a psychological problem in the other, which creates a physical problem in them.
Exactly. And there's also the double pause, which occurs when both partners happen to hit major hormonal or health transitions at the exact same time, which just compounds the stress.
Does this dynamic shift when we look at same-sex couples?
It shifts significantly. In homosexual relationships, you often see parallel biological changes. A female couple might experience menopause ×2, or a male couple might go through parallel andropause.
So they're going through the exact same thing at the same time?
Yes. Because they are navigating very similar endocrine and physical transitions simultaneously, it frequently fosters a profound sense of deep empathy.
That makes total sense.
Furthermore, same-sex couples have often navigated minority stress and social stigma as a unit throughout their lives. This shared social resilience acts as a powerful buffering mechanism that protects their relationship quality in later life.
And the research also highlights a psychometric tool called XYG, right, which maps out this complexity.
Yes, the XYGO tool.
It looks at genes and hormones, gender identity, and sexual orientation all at once. It proves that sexual aging is tridimensional. It is never just about one biological factor.
Never.
Which makes me wonder, if aging intimacy is this massive interconnected web of hormones, vascular health, emotional synchrony, and shared timelines, why has mainstream medicine historically just handed out a blue pill and called it a day?
Well, because the assessment tools we've relied on for decades are fundamentally flawed. They were built entirely on that deficit model we discussed earlier.
A broken car model.
Exactly. For men, the standard is the IIEF, the International Index of Erectile Function. For women, it's the FSFI, the Female Sexual Function Index. If you look at these questionnaires, they essentially just ask, what is mechanically broken?
They completely ignore the emotional environment. They don't ask about the partner. They don't ask about empathy. And they certainly don't account for adaptation.
Exactly. To correct this, leading researchers are proposing a radical new conceptual framework called the Sexual Aging Index, or the SAI.
The SAI. And this one doesn't just measure dysfunction.
Right.
It measures emotional adaptation, partner feedback, relational intimacy, and sociocultural opportunities.
Yeah.
It actually asks if the couple has the privacy and social support necessary to be intimate.
It measures success rather than just cataloging failure.
I love that. And moving to a holistic measurement tool like the SAI is driving a massive shift in treatment. We're moving away from the localized quick fix toward truly systemic cross-cultural interventions.
Yes, and traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, has actually been utilizing this systemic approach for centuries.
Yeah, the medical reviews dive deep into TCM, specifically focusing on energy balance, the doctrines of kidney key deficiency, and the depletion of Jing, or essence.
Which sounds esoteric, but...
Right, it's not just ancient philosophy. There is hard molecular biology backing it up. They utilize herbal agents like epimedium.
Also known as horny goatweed.
Yeah. And epimedium contains a specific compound called icariin. Instead of just temporarily forcing blood vessels open like a modern pharmaceutical, icariin actively enhances the body's natural production of nitric oxide, providing a much more sustained improvement in endothelial health.
They combine this with Panax ginseng to combat systemic fatigue and acupuncture to balance the nervous system.
And we see a similarly systemic approach in functional nutrition, too.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's not just general advice to eat your vegetables. The Mediterranean diet is heavily prescribed specifically because its high antioxidant profile reduces that systemic inflammaging we talked about.
Right.
They pair the diet with targeted nutrients. L-arginine is an amino acid that acts directly as a nitric oxide donor, fundamentally improving blood flow. Zinc is supplemented because it's a critical building block for testosterone synthesis.
And omega-3s are used to increase the flexibility of vascular walls. So we have ancient herbs and targeted molecular nutrition. But then the interventions take a sharp turn into therapies that sound like science fiction. I mean, low-intensity shockwave therapy.
Lasers. I know, it sounds intense. These are investigational regenerative physical therapies.
Yeah.
Low-intensity shockwave therapy, or Li-ESWT, uses targeted acoustic sound waves.
Sound waves.
Yeah. When these waves hit aging tissue, they create microscopic trauma. The body responds to this microtrauma by rushing stem cells and growth factors to the area, literally growing new, healthy blood vessels.
Well, that's incredible.
It's a process called angiogenesis. It attempts to treat the root cause of vascular decline rather than just managing the symptom.
And for women, they are using energy-based devices, utilizing lasers and radio frequency directly on the vaginal mucosa. Which sounds terrifying, honestly, but the underlying mechanism is fascinating.
It is.
The targeted energy stimulates collagen neogenesis.
Huh?
It tricks the tissue into producing brand new collagen and elastin, physically restoring the elasticity and moisture that menopause diminished.
They are also exploring platelet-rich plasma, or PRP, and stem cell therapies to essentially reboot the cellular machinery.
It's just wild.
It represents the integration of the future. The field is attempting to marry the holistic, energetic balance of Eastern traditions with the highly specific, regenerative molecular technologies of Western medicine.
Okay, I have to challenge this approach, though. We just spent all this time talking about adaptive reframing and the importance of accepting that the body changes.
Fair point.
If we are using acoustic shock waves to grow new blood vessels and lasers to stimulate collagen production, are we genuinely helping couples adapt to getting older? Or are we just throwing millions of dollars of cutting-edge tech at the problem in a desperate attempt to artificially turn the clock back to age 25? I mean, it sounds like we're just trying to fix the broken car again.
That is the central critical tension in sexual medicine today, and your skepticism is totally valid.
It just seems contradictory.
The leading researchers argue that if you use a laser or a shockwave in isolation, you will fail. The goal of regenerative therapy is not to create a 25-year-old body. The goal is to remove the most severe physical roadblocks.
Like the excruciating pain.
Exactly, or total vascular failure, so that the couple has a comfortable physiological baseline. Once that baseline is restored, they still have to do the profound emotional work of adapting to their current stage of life.
Ah, I see.
The technology doesn't replace adaptation, it just makes adaptation physically possible.
Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us to how people actually do that emotional work. How do we synthesize the biology, the psychology, and the medical interventions into something actionable?
Right.
There is a brilliant framework detailed in the research called the AAA strategy for successful sexual aging: acceptance, adaptation, and activation.
It's a great model.
But instead of just listing these as concepts, let's look at how this plays out in practice.
Consider a couple in their late 60s navigating the CouplePause. The first step, acceptance, is not about giving up or resigning to a sexless life.
Right.
It's about having a transparent conversation where they acknowledge the reality of their physical changes without judgment. They actively eliminate the internalized societal stigma that tells them they are broken simply because their bodies require more time to respond than they did decades ago. They accept their new physiological baseline.
And once that baseline is accepted, they move to adaptation. If penetrative intimacy has become painful or physically difficult, an adaptive couple doesn't just throw their hands up and stop touching each other.
No, they diversify.
Exactly.
Right.
They explore entirely new ways to connect, focusing on emotional intimacy, massage, or different forms of affection. They adjust their expectations, finding genuine joy in the menu of options they have right now, rather than mourning the menu they had 30 years ago.
The final step is activation, and this is often the most challenging.
Why is that?
Because it requires actively seeking out and creating opportunities for bonding. You can't just wait for a spontaneous spark of youthful desire. You have to intentionally build the fire.
Right, you have to work at it.
This is especially vital when couples face constraints like chronic illness or when they transition into institutional living. You have to actively prioritize the connection.
But activation requires an environment that allows it. And this is where healthcare and societal policy have a massive blind spot.
Yes.
If a couple wants to activate their intimacy, but they are living in an assisted care facility that treats them merely as patients to be managed, rather than adults with a fundamental right to privacy, the AAA strategy falls completely apart.
This raises an important question. For this to work on a large scale, we have to dismantle sexual ageism at an institutional level. Sexual well-being must be embedded into our standard healthy aging policies, recognized as a core component of human dignity, regardless of age or physical capability.
When you zoom out and look at this AAA framework: acceptance, adaptation, activation, you realize it isn't just about intimacy. It's a pretty brilliant universal blueprint for resilience in absolutely every aspect of getting older.
It really is.
Accepting the reality of time, adapting your strategies to meet your current capabilities, and actively engaging with the life you have right now.
It radically shifts the definition of aging. It goes from a tragic process of inevitable mechanical loss to a process of continuous creative evolution.
The core takeaway here is profoundly optimistic, I think. Vitality, intimacy, and marital happiness do not have an expiration date.
They don't.
They don't disappear just because the engine has a few more miles on it. They simply transition from the performance-driven sprint of your 20s into a beautiful, enduring marathon of adaptation, emotional attunement, and shared resilience.
A marathon that, as the cellular biology clearly shows us, actively protects your physical health and extends your lifespan.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over today, building directly on that idea of institutional constraints we just touched on.
It's an important one.
If the hard science clearly proves that healthy, intimate relationships and emotional synchrony literally reduce biological inflammation, balance our immune systems, and extend our lifespans, are the restrictive, privacy-stripping designs of modern nursing homes and elder care facilities actually accelerating the aging process of the people living there simply by denying them the fundamental human right to intimacy?
It's a heavy thought.
If we truly want to stop treating people like broken cars, maybe it's time we stop parking them in garages that strip away what makes them human. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning, keep adapting, and we'll see you next time.